Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. Now, do you remember that time when Nvidia unlaunched a product stating that despite being a fantastic graphics card, it wasn't named right? And I quote, having two GPUs with the 4080 designation is confusing. That's right, we're talking about the unlaunching of the 12GB 4080 back on October 14th, just 2 months ago now. And for those of you not yet up to speed, when Nvidia announced the GeForce 40 series, they did so with three products, the RTX 4090, RTX 4080 16GB, and RTX 4080 12GB. The problem being that the two RTX 4080 variants were much different than what the difference in memory capacity led on. And that's because in order to cut down the memory capacity without using lower density chips, you also need to reduce the memory bus width. In the end though, the 4080s were entirely different products using different silicon that would result in substantially different performance, but this sort of dodgy anti-consumer behavior wasn't new for Nvidia. They've done this sort of thing before, and really worse. Remember the DDR4 version of the GT 1030? The real mistake Nvidia made with the 12GB 4080 was to officially announce that particular anti-consumer move to the entire world in the biggest event they'd held in years. Traditionally, how they like to handle these dodgy product releases is to sneak them out at a later date via a silent launch, meaning fewer people notice and even fewer seem to care. And this is exactly what they've done with the 8GB version of the RTX 3060, ironically officially launching the product on October 27th, just 12 days after unlaunching the 12GB 4080 for having a confusing name. Now, although it's true that both the 8 and 12GB variants of the RTX 3060 are based on the G0106 silicon, so it is technically the same GPU, the changes here go well beyond just an adjustment to the memory capacity. The memory subsystem of the 8GB model has been drastically reduced. The L2 cache is 50% larger for the 12GB model, as is the bus width, and that means bandwidth is 61% greater, as the original model produced 360GB per second, whereas the new 8GB variant has been slashed to just 224GB per second, the same bandwidth as the RTX 3050. Ultimately, what all this means is the 8GB RTX 3060 is going to be a good bit slower than the 12GB model that we're all familiar with. And spoiler alert, it's 17% slower on average according to our 12-game benchmark, but in some instances we're seeing margins of over 30%, so it's a big deal. Also, if you're wondering, Nvidia hasn't made any official adjustments to the MSRP, so the 8GB RTX 3060 still comes in at $330 US. Looking over at Newegg, we see that the 12GB RTX 3060 start at $350, with a number of models available between $350 and $380 US. Meanwhile, the most affordable 8GB variant available right now comes from Inno3D, and it starts at $385. Though there are some Asus models on back order at $360 and $370 US. The point is here, in terms of pricing, there is no distinguishing between the original 12GB models and these new gimped 8GB versions. Here in Australia, the Galax model that I've purchased costs $500, so that's a 10% discount from the original 12GB version, and you might think, well, that's okay, but it's not. The RTX 3060 was released almost 2 years ago now. Basically, everyone is familiar with how it performs, and those that aren't can quickly consult the bevy of online benchmarks. This new 8GB model, though, is nowhere to be found as there isn't a review program. It's up to reviewers to purchase this model and inform their audience. In fact, you might not have even known there was an 8GB version, or simply assumed that the RTX 3060 only came with 8GB of VRAM, just as the 3060 Ti does. The trap here being that unsuspecting consumers could be baited into paying RTX 3060 12GB money, or very near RTX 3060 12GB money, for a product that is significantly slower. It's almost a scam, and some of you might even suggest that it is. Now, I asked Nvidia for an official response as to why the 8GB version was released. They simply said it was to offer customers more options, and they also stated that the 12GB version was still going to be made available. So I guess it's okay then. And just to be clear, this is an Nvidia product. This isn't their partners going rogue. The 8GB RTX 3060 is an official Nvidia product, and their partners are likely obligated to produce it. It seems that Nvidia are looking to clear out their inventory of lower-end Ampere GPUs, and they're no doubt keen to maximize profits as they do so. This move also allows them to sell defective G0106 silicon for a lot more money than they would selling it as an RTX 3050. Of course, our issue is the fact that we now have two products called GeForce RTX 3060 and they don't deliver the same level of performance. And in many instances, it's not even close. And I'm not talking about memory-bound testing, as in exceeding the 8GB VRAM buffer. I'm talking about performance when remaining well within the 8GB buffer. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to go over a few games and then I'll show you the 12 game average. And please note that the results for the 12 and 8GB 3060s are fresh using the latest display drivers, so all other GPUs have just been included as a bit of a rough comparison. Starting with Cyberpunk 2077, we find that the 12GB model is 13% faster at 1080p when compared to the new 8GB model. Not a massive difference, but it is certainly noteworthy. That margin did grow to 18% at 1440p, and now we're looking at two different tiers of performance and a noticeably better gaming experience with the original 12GB model. Moving on to Dying Light 2, here we have a game that is clearly very memory heavy, and as such the new 8GB model clearly limits the performance of the RTX 3060 GPU. The original 12GB card was a massive 35% faster at 1080p. That is a tremendous performance difference for two products that share the exact same name. And it's the same story at 1440p. In fact, here we go from a very console-like 34 FPS with the 8GB version to a much smoother 46 FPS using the original. Halo Infinite sees the 12GB model offering 21% greater performance at 1080p, going from 63 FPS to 76 FPS, another massive performance difference for two products that share the same name. The margin remains similar at 1440p, here the original 12GB 3060 was 19% faster. Horizon Zero Dawn sees a smaller 16% performance improvement for the 12GB model over the new 8GB version, though that margin did grow to 20% at 1440p. Still, both results are bad, as double-digit changes in performance are unacceptable, especially given the difference in memory capacity plays no role here. We're also looking at 22% greater performance for the 12GB variant in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, as the new 8GB model drops performance to 85 FPS. The margin's similar at 1440p, here the 12GB version is 20% faster, rendering an additional 12 FPS. And I think that's enough with the individual game results, you guys get the idea. On average, you can expect 17% better performance with the 12GB model at 1080p, but as we saw, that margin can be as high as 35%. It's a similar story at 1440p. When working within the 8GB buffer, the 12GB model was still on average 18% faster, as it does enjoy significantly more memory bandwidth. So there you have it, the new 8GB version of the GeForce RTX 3060. It is noticeably slower than the original, and in a number of instances was significantly slower in our testing. In my opinion, this is a horribly anti-consumer move by Nvidia. It serves little more than to line their pockets while misleading and ripping off customers. It's a disgusting move by Nvidia, and you might think, well, the price could improve, at which point it might not be that bad in terms of value. After all, let's say Nvidia drops the price relative to the 12GB version by 20% or even 30%, then the 8GB RTX 3060 would start to look pretty great in terms of value, at least compared to Nvidia's own product stack. I'd agree with that assessment had it been called, let's say, the RTX 3060 LE 8GB, something that makes it very clear to the consumer that this isn't your typical RTX 3060. In that case, I wouldn't really have a problem with this cut down model, and while I'd still certainly prefer the name to change entirely, I could at least accept what would be a more honest attempt at making it clear to buyers that this is a different version. To demonstrate just how difficult it is for the uninitiated to even tell which model they're buying, or that there is even a different model, here's the box from our original RTX 3060, the Gigabyte Eagle model that we reviewed for our day one review. GeForce RTX 3060, as you'd expect, it's a GeForce RTX 3060. It does say Eagle 12G here, which 12GB graphics card, but most people are paying attention to the RTX 3060 bit, especially when they're buying them off a shelf or even an online store. And then of course we have the new 8GB model, GeForce RTX 3060. So looks pretty similar. Of course, you need to pay attention that this one is 8GB and that one is 12GB. But yeah, if you're looking at the boxes from the side here, they're both GeForce RTX 3060s. And by just looking at the boxes, you wouldn't be able to tell that in some instances this box here is up to 35% faster. Well, the box isn't, but the graphics card that comes in the box up to 35% faster than this one. And yeah, they look the same. They're both RTX 3060s, and they probably, well, at least right now, are available at basically the same price. Those of you operating under the assumption that the RTX 3060 is an RTX 3060 might see an 8GB model selling for a reasonable discount and think, hey, I've stumbled upon quite a bargain here, snap it up, only to realize that the bargain is quite a bit slower than what it should have been. And for those of you none the wiser, it just means you could have done better and possibly gone further between upgrades. There's simply no getting around the fact that Nvidia is without question preying on consumers, and while fanboys will no doubt make excuses for them, at the end of the day, they know what they're doing. They've taken a well-established, almost 2-year-old product, quietly cut it down, and they're making out like a bandit. Unfortunately, this sort of anti-consumer behavior will continue unless Nvidia faces enough backlash from consumers and the enthusiast community. We're always going to fight against this sort of anti-consumer behavior from corporations, whether it be Nvidia, AMD, Intel, LG, Samsung, MSI, Asus, and so on. Many of these companies we've already taken to task in the past and will continue to do so. Rest assured, if AMD were to pull a similar stunt, we'd go after them just as hard, much like when we dedicated a video to calling them out over their plans to axe Zen 3 support for 300 and 400 series motherboards. We were having none of their excuses, we didn't buy into the technical reasons for why they had to end support. Put simply, they misled consumers, we went after them, they corrected the issue, and this was made possible through strong pushback from the community. I don't expect we'll see the same thing here with Nvidia, but we've done our bit. You've now been made aware of what the 8GB RTX 3060 is. You've also been made aware that it actually exists, and yeah, you now know to avoid it, especially at the current asking prices. And I'm going to leave that one there. I think we're done here. If you enjoyed the video, do give it a like, support work like this. You can also Patreon, Floatplane, sign up to either one of those. You'll get access to our exclusive Discord server. Tim and I do a monthly live stream for members, behind the scenes content, Q&As, a lot of cool stuff there. So if you're interested, check it out. But if not, that is perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.